Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, what another Israeli assassination looks like from Washington.
As far as Israel is concerned, they have been assassinating Palestinian leaders all along, ever since the creation of the state.
The view from a Palestinian journalist in the State Department briefing room, pressing for answers. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
My name is Said Arikat. I am a journalist. I'm a correspondent for Al-Quds daily newspaper, a newspaper that publishes in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, has done so since 1950. I'm also an adjunct professor at American University, where I teach a media course.
Said, it's really good to have you back on The Take. We have gotten news of the assassination of the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, who hasn't been in the role that long, and this happened in Gaza. As of this recording, there is no comment yet from Hamas. So what do we know so far?
Well, what we know is what the Israelis are claiming, that they basically killed Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. He was the leader of the branch in Gaza. He was killed in a battle, with two other militants, apparently, which is kind of odd because he is the leader of the movement to be out there fighting with fighters. An official statement. Netanyahu said no hostages were killed in this operation assassination. As far as Israel is concerned, they have been assassinating Palestinian leaders all along, ever since the creation of the state. Mm-hmm. With Hamas, we saw that Rantisi was assassinated. Before him, Sheikh Yassin was assassinated, the leader of Hamas. Most recently, they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. So there is nothing new. The movement goes on. I mean, this is the thing in the West. They're hung up with personalities. But in a revolutionary movement, it goes on. Every leader feels that he's there for a very short time. He will lead as best as he or she can. And that's what we have seen from Yahya Sinwar.
So here at The Take, we did an in-depth profile of Yahya Sinwar that we will share with people. But for listeners and viewers who have not seen that, can you remind us what we should know about who he was?
Well, Yahya Sinwar is a very simple man, a very modest man. He was born in Gaza. His family comes from the small villages around the Gaza, what's called the Gaza envelope. He spent many, many years in Israeli prisons. He was an activist as a young man during the first Intifada, and he was, put in prison. He spent 20 years, was, traded for Shalit, an Israeli soldier, back in 2011. He is obviously a very effective leader. He was able to reshape the movement to become more effective. There's a lot of claims that he was the architect of the October 7 attack. So we did not hear any confirmation of that or any refutation of that. So we'll take it at face value. But he is an effective leader. The fact that he was elected to replace Ismail Haniyeh speaks a lot about his ability as a leader and his vitality as the top member of the movement.
Well, Said, I'm catching you before the daily briefing at the State Department in the U.S. this Thursday afternoon. The news is going to be this. This is the news of the day. And it's at a time when people in Gaza were already saying that these are some of the darkest days of Israel's war so far. So what answers are you hoping to get out of Washington officials today?
Well, the Washington officials, as a matter of conduct or as a matter of tradition, they normally repeat the Israeli narrative. So we would expect them to just repeat the Israeli narrative and say, if that proves to be true, they will always caveat it, whether it happened or not. We will wait for confirmation or whatever. But they will say that they will claim that this is a good day. It is a step towards probably negotiation and so on, which is nonsense, of course. They always personalize the issue. They're saying that Sinwar was obstinate, that the talks collapsed after he became leader. I mean, not even mentioning that Israel assassinated the chief negotiator. So that is what we expect them to say. So they will say, we shall see how this pans out and how it affects the fighting on the ground. So it is very much, I can almost hear the words before they happen.
You could write the script
what's
right
going
now.
to be said. Right, exactly. So what's being scripted right now. Absolutely.
And because your years of experience in that room, many, many years, it doesn't change. You already know.
It does not change. But it is important for us, Malika, is to go there for the record, to state these things and, for the record, because this is history in the making. Yeah. This genocide has gone on now for over a year. We see the burning of the tents. We see the killing of children. We see the starvation. We see the aid trucks held up by Israel because it is intent on starving the Palestinians. And we see, this basically is ethnic cleansing because that's the ultimate goal for Israel as it happens. So, you need to probe these issues. You need to hold their feet to the fire. You need to see what is the plan next. We know we got wind of a plan that Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, will aim to probably submit or discuss right after the election. And they are going to use whatever time left between the 5th of November and the 20th of January 2025 to basically try to gain support for that plan. The plan, of course, calls for a new regime in Gaza, as they call it. The plan does not even include the Palestinian Authority.
I want to talk more about how news like that trickles down to the briefing room. But before I get there, I wanted to ask you one more question on Hamas and what this might mean, because you mentioned, so Israel has assassinated the lead negotiator, Haniya, and now Sinwar took his place. We've already had a series of killings in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran. Sinwar had been number one wanted by Israel for a while, especially after the October 7th attack. So then what does this mean for Hamas? You alluded earlier that leaders replace themselves, but what might it mean?
Right. I mean, I tell you what, leadership is important. A leader like Sinwar is very important. He is held in high esteem among Palestinians. He was looked at as an effective revolutionary leader. There are many claims as to his ability to work and mold and lead and provide answers and provide initiative. So we know this about him. He was very effective in prison. He was a leader of the other prisoners. So I don't want to minimize the loss of someone like Sinwar and what it means to the movement itself. We've seen also someone who's larger than life among Palestinians. Yasser Arafat, we saw him die and leave the scene and so on. That does not end the cause, does not end the fighting. We have seen the most intense fighting after that. That was exactly 20 years ago. The cause still goes on. So more than likely, we will probably see a new kind of leadership emerge. And this leadership would probably more determined, more resilient, more experienced than the one before it. We also saw, I would be remiss if I don't mention that. We've seen that on September 27th, that the Israelis assassinated the head of Hezbollah, Said Hassan Nasrallah. And the fight in Lebanon goes on. Hezbollah did not collapse, did not break down. Quite the contrary, we've seen, the major fighting happen after that.
It's the deadliest drone attack Hezbollah has carried out against Israel in over a year. Its target, a military base in the northern city of Ben Yamina that sits between Tel Aviv and the port city of Haifa.
So to think that, the leader is everything is wrong. The leader is something absolutely, and provides an address to provide comfort, provide leadership, but he's not, or in this case, he's not everything.
More with Said after the break. Thank you for that analysis, Said. I want to push on to what someone with your analysis, your background, your expertise, what that means in these briefing rooms here in Washington. So the briefings have become almost must-see on social media. A search for State Department briefing on TikTok leads to several videos, many of which you feature in pretty prominently.
There was a report that Israel's assault forced a nurse to leave babies behind. They were found decomposing. Are you aware of the story?
I am aware of that report,
Okay.
Said.
And do you take it as it happened, or if it did happen, is that a war crime?
Said, I would say that is a tragedy.
And that appears to have been good and bad for you. Israeli publications have also attacked you for many of your questions and your work in those rooms. So on a day like today, when there's big news for Palestinians that the world will be covering, how does it feel to be one of the few Palestinians in a briefing room?
Well, it feels tense and it feels stressful, I must admit. I mean, it's not something that you take nonchalantly because I'm a Palestinian. I feel what they feel. I feel that this, this Nakba, this catastrophe has gone on for 75 years and still goes on today before our eyes. We see it gavel to gavel. So I feel that, but I also feel the responsibility to ask the proper questions, not to let my emotion take the best of me, because I want to see what they are thinking, what they are doing, hoping that I can get something to basically do the proper analysis. In the briefing room, in the State Department, my colleagues, many of them, in fact, most of them have probably reported from either the West Bank or Israel and so on. So they know firsthand what's going on, and they know how to ask the proper question, and releases some of the stress. But it also it augments my ability to ask further questions and to further the issues and get them to respond to these questions. Because when you have more than one person basically asking in different ways the same issue, that can get them to say something, whether they want to or not.
Earlier, you mentioned the burning tents, the Israeli strike on hospital tents, and we saw these horrific images. Talk to me about one of those exchanges that you've had in recent days, because when you see images like that, and then it's your job to hold U.S. officials' feet to the fire, what is that actually like? What happens?
Well, I tell you, that's a very good point. I mean, when we saw the bombing and the burning of the tents, I asked the question,
striking the tents, burning people alive and so on. Now, I asked you about this last week, and you said, no, we would never accept this being normalized. But in fact, it is being normalized.
It's not. What happened in that strike was horrifying.
Is it horrifying enough to be considered a war crime?
So I cannot make that kind of assessment from here. As you know, Said, there's a process.
They always say that Israel does not commit war crimes. So that's what I meant by regurgitating the Israeli narrative always, And we asked about also that, there was a long report or a lengthy report in the New York Times about how Israel used Palestinians as human shields.
I know you've always accused the Palestinian groups or even Hezbollah of using civilians as a human shield, but you declare them as terrorists. Would you declare the Israeli army as a terrorist organization?
No, the Israeli army is not a terrorist organization.
Okay, they're not a terrorist organization, but they continue. Let me finish on this. So we see this happen time and again.
So you have these kind of exchanges that, on the one hand, shed light on where they stand and so on, their commitment to Israel unwavering, that tends to discredit whatever claim they have about human rights, about the need to allow aid in, the need to help, no Palestinians should be killed and so on, while they're in fact approving, and not only approving, but sending the weapons to kill thousands of Palestinians.
Yeah. I want to talk a little more about that doublespeak there, because there seems to be an inconsistency. So we've seen for over a year now how the rhetoric from the U.S. spins not only the actions from the Israeli military, but also its own. Before the Sinwar news, we were planning to talk about how the U.S. is sending 100 soldiers and an anti-missile system to Israel, while also giving the Israelis 30 days to let the aid into Gaza or risk cutting military aid. That's one of the statements that came out. Do you sense that inconsistency in the room?
Always. The United States is not only inconsistent, but it's plain hypocritical. Whether on the aid issue, because, we've seen them say that aid must go in. We've seen that for over a year, and then when, a couple of trucks are lit in, they claim the credit that we are the ones that are getting it through. We're the Israelis are cooperating and so on. No aid was allowed in to northern Gaza since October 1. And, they said this is unacceptable. We want them to allow, but they stopped short of basically imposing any kind of sanctions or any kind of consequences to Israel's behavior on Israel. We know that there was a letter that was sent, for instance, by the Secretary of State to the Israelis a couple of days ago, demanding that aid will be allowed in or else. We don't know what that or else mean, but we have seen it in the past. Back in April, the President of the United States held back or halted the shipment of the 2,000-pound bombs, the bunker busters, for 2 days, and then all hell broke loose here in Washington. And then he, of course, released it thereafter, in 48 hours later, and so on. So their claim that Israel's security is top priority. They always say that. I remember one of the spokespeople told me one time that Israel's security is sacred. And I said, I thought the Bible was sacred.
All I can tell you is what the Secretary told the Prime Minister directly in his meeting in Israel last week, which is that our commitment to Israel's security is sacrosanct. We have proved that not just with words, but with deeds.
So that is their position. They make good on that position. They stick to it. It is the one constant, almost by any briefer in Washington, in any briefing in Washington. That is the one theme that they all stick to.
Said, you are a veteran in your field, and many of your questions in the State Department's briefing room get these same robotic answers that you have heard time and time again. And I wonder what keeps you there, what keeps you doing it, and why you go on.
Well, that's a very good question. And sometimes I ask this question to myself, what am I doing here? But I tell you, Malika, now, the war in Gaza or Lebanon sucks up maybe, 2/3 of any briefing, or even sometimes longer. So there are a lot of people asking questions. But there was a time when I was the only one that would be asking about the Palestinian issue.
Wow.
I was the only Palestinian in the room. So that's what keeps me going. The fact that, the catastrophe goes on, I also feel an obligation that we have to inform our people, inform anyone that is willing to read my writings and so on, and basically use whatever platforms available to reflect also these issues and so on. So I keep going because the issue keeps going and keeps very active.
Well, finally, Said, you keep going. Unfortunately, the news of devastation out of Gaza, dismal news out of the occupied West Bank, all of it keeps going too. And sometimes it's really indescribable. And so I wonder for you, are there moments when it is just too difficult for you to even form a question, to want to continue doing this work?
Many times. I can't, oh my goodness, it's countless times. But I remember, for instance, when Shireen was assassinated.
Shireen Abu Salah.
When Shireen Abu Salah, because it just happened.
Shireen Abu Salah, Jazeera, Washington.
And we went to the briefing. And I could not frame my question. because she had been there with us in the briefing room. And I said this to Ned Price.
She was with us in this room.
It is important to us.
Remember that.
It is important to us that her legacy be honored, be protected with accountability for those who senselessly took her life.
So that was a very difficult moment. So, when something that happens so profoundly like this, sometimes it's very difficult for you to frame. You could always ask questions, but you want to frame it succinctly, effectively, and so on. And sometimes you're not allowed this because it is so overwhelming. I remember when on the 17th of October, exactly a year ago today, when a hospital was bombed and 300 people were killed, or maybe 500 people were killed, and so on. I mean, how could you ask the question? You say, and then they say, well, we don't know what the number is. We don't know. This is, Israel says that this was a mortar that was fired by one group towards Israel and fell short and so on. So moments like this are very, very difficult. I mean, when you see the burning and so on, when you see them do what they do, when you see them, when you see that the children are starving and being killed, when Hind, for instance, when they killed the 6-year-old Hind after being there for hours when she was speaking to her mother and so on. These are really very, very difficult and heartbreaking. And sometimes you feel, sometimes I feel a bit of shame for, staying calm, for not losing it all because, but then, I have to go on. I have to report. I have to tell people what the Americans think because that is my job.
And that's The Take. What questions do you think reporters in the U.S. State Department briefing room should ask? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like conversations like these, give this episode a thumbs up. And remember to subscribe to the Al Jazeera English channel here on YouTube.